Welcome. We've got a few others joining. Okay. I'm Jacqueline. I lead all of our partnerships here at ResultsLab. Really excited about this conversation today and have all of you here. I see some of our past clients, some of our partners, and a lot of new faces. So we are based in Denver, Colorado, but we have consultants all across the U.S., partners all across the U.S. We've worked with hundreds of nonprofits to date, been around for 10 years. So we're really excited about this conversation today. I spent about a decade in working in nonprofits, also at my local community foundation. So I've been on both sides of data practice, and I get really excited and passionate about this work, especially around using data to know what you're doing is really working and having intended impact so that you can have greater impact in the community. I've got Kenzie Strong here with me today. She's going to be leading us through. It's a webinar workshop kind of session. Really excited for you to take away some tangible resources to really start doing this work within your own organizations. We know we've been listening to our clients over the last 2 years. It's been a really challenging time. It's been uncertain. There's been a lot of funding cuts. We know it's challenging. And so we are definitely here to help. We do all sorts of evaluation services. We have outsourced services as well. So we could be your whole impact management team if that's something that you need. But today we're going to dive into two things we've been hearing most, which is, gosh, right now I just really need data so that I can tell stronger stories with data to attract more funds. It's really competitive right now. So we're excited to see you all. As you're joining, introduce yourselves and let us know what your biggest data challenges are, what your role is, where you're calling in from. And I'm going to pass it over to Kenzie here in a minute to get us started. We're going to be focusing on data use for driving decisions around program effectiveness and that intersection on how that comes towards strong data storytelling. And then really helping think through how you could empower your teams to be doing this work every day. So with that, Kenzie, I'm going to let you go ahead and dive in and introduce yourself.
You got it. Hi, everyone. Kenzie Strong. I am especially compelled by a conversation like this today. As we think about, like, as Jackie said, there's a lot of moving pieces right now in every organization that's joining, no doubt. And really want to look at where are the leverage points when it comes to something like data, how it can really be a springboard for your organization. And, we've had a lot of conversations lately, the question of, like, is this where I should be putting attention right now? I've got a lot of things I need to be focused on. Things are feeling somewhat overwhelming, to be honest. And so I think the answer is yes. And I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like today, and where data can really bring leverage as you're really trying to sustain organizations, trying to potentially grow organizations. We know everyone on the call is in a slightly different space, but I also think there's going to be a lot of shared threads that we unpack together today. So here is the agenda. We are going to just take a little bit of space first on, there's a lot of terms that are thrown around, outcomes driven, data driven. I just want to step back and really think about, like, what does that mean? What does that journey look like? And then we're going to be taking two pillars today together. One is data for decisions, and the other is data for story. Encourage, I see we have a pretty nice blend in the audience today around, from some of you are program folks in, like, program seats, others are in fundraising, development seats, and then I see leadership on the call. So I think between these two areas, there's going to be some important kind of takeaways and reflections for each of you. And then as we get into conversation today, and as we weave through some kind of frames to think about, some examples to look at, we are also going to be sharing a platform that we've recently created to really help folks kind of streamline this journey. And so it'll be a nice way for you to kind of get a flavor of what's in there, but also as a way to kind of just bring this to life in a way that I think will go far. So that is our agenda. I didn't actually properly introduce myself. I jumped right in, but for those of you who don't know me, I do lead our impact work, our consulting work within ResultsLab. I've been with the organization for almost a decade, from our earliest days. I've gotten to work with several of you on the call throughout those years, but my focus and our team's focus is really very much on how do we do this in a way that can be really practical, very much applied, so that you can get what you need to really do your work best. So I'll continue to kind of bring that voice forward and that reflection forward in conversation today. All right, so let's get into it. First, just the kind of the frame that I want to introduce as we think about what does an outcomes-driven organization even look like and feel like. And you're going to see a few key terms on the slide. Some of these may be familiar, some may be fresh for you. But what we tend to find is organizations at their beginnings, they may be really leveraging something we would call anecdotes, right? You may have been on a call with one of your frontline staff and they're like, I just had this most amazing transformation of change, right? With one of the clients you're serving. You're hearing that story, you're sharing that story, maybe up the pipes in your organization, and that's one example of change, which is great. Anecdotes are great, but as a standalone, they don't systematically tell your story, right? So as you move from anecdotes, you may be stepping into really a focus on outputs. And as you think about outputs, this is your counts, right? Really thinking about what are the direct results of what you're doing. So number of people you're serving, it might be your quality of what you're doing, your workshops. It could be, how frequently people are attending your services. So I stop here because this is honestly where most organizations have really been honed in on. They're getting this right. They're doing this fairly well. But a lot of organizations we're talking to, are having the struggle of how do you move from there to the so what of those outputs, which are the outcomes, right? The true change you're really trying to manifest through your programs. When we think about change, there's different levels of change from short term to longer term. It could be shifts in knowledge and practices, behaviors, right? So if we're thinking about, I see many of you that may be coming from youth backgrounds, right? Youth development backgrounds. So it could be really looking at, how you're changing confidence in the young people you're serving, or how you may be changing academic engagement, right? So really trying to get to the ultimate shifts. And then as we move into impact, it's really the ultimate so what. This may be more akin to your mission, really looking at change in status. So if you're working with a middle school, I see some Girls Inc. folks on the call. If you're working with a middle school program, maybe one of the ultimate longer terms is really getting kids graduated from high school and into strong, thriving post-secondary careers, right? So that may be an impact point, but something you may not be honing in on in the near term. So all this to say, I just wanted to paint that picture, and our goal as we walked into this together today is how you can move along this continuum. If you are someone who may be just stepping into outcome orientation, how do you continue to build that up? If you're not there yet, how do you step into that? So I want to just take a pulse with y'all, and just with the question of, as you think about the kind of core data that is really driving your organization right now, which of these do you think is most common for you right now that you're really focused in on? Practically, feel free to just drop in chat, anecdotes, outputs, outcomes, or impact, just so we can get a flavor. Cool. All right, so I'm seeing some pretty common flex across the continuum, probably with a heavier concentration on outcomes. That's great, love to see that. And sometimes, honestly, it depends. It may have a bearing on the kind of organization that you are and the types of services that you're setting in, making it more natural to be focused on outputs versus outcomes. So one thing I just want you to take a reflection of, this is primarily where your data is sitting right now. I want you to kind of take a similar reflection to think about when you think about decision making in your organization and storytelling in your organization. Is it aligned with what you've just put in chat? If you're saying a lot of your data is outcomes, are you equally using outcomes to really drive your decision making, outcome data or outcome information, and to share your story? And so that's sometimes what we find. There can be a gap there of really how do you move from having that outcome data to really leveraging it for change. And so that's what we want to spend a little bit more time on today. Yeah. Great. So as I mentioned, it's a journey. For some, this journey sounds like you guys have probably been walking it for some time now. It can take multiple years, right, to kind of really move your organization along that continuum. We use a framework called Align, Capture, Transform, just a simple framing to help folks walk that journey. So just a little bit more on what this is. You can see on the slide just a little bit more detail that's underneath the surface. One of the things we often notice is an organization may say like, hey, I need more data, right? I need more information, data on, a certain set of outcomes, for example. So they jump right into, okay, what are the right tools? Should I hop into a survey? What does that look like, right? Versus needing to like really ground in what we call the align phase. And this is our space to really make sure you're crystal clear on what are your outcomes, what are you going to do to make those outcomes happen, and with whom. So some of you may have theories of change, logic models, right? Those are different forms of really grounding in the align phase. We call it impact strategy, but I always, and if you're kind of thinking about where you are on a continuum right now, I would always encourage you to anchor there first. So everything that follows, when we start collecting the information, when we start using the information, it's grounded back on that North Star of where you want to go. It saves you a lot of time and effort, because sometimes we and all of us do this. We end up with like a huge stack of indicators or data points that we're collecting, and then at that moment we're like, why are we collecting that? Like, what are we doing with this, right? Versus needing to always have that tether point back to your align. Then moving into capture, you've got the ability to like get really clear on your goals. So interesting in this chat, folks on the call who are saying they're actually measuring impact. That's significant. That's like, to be able to really understand those long-term sustained changes. That's not necessarily for every organization, right? To get to a place of outcomes can be sufficient. And so it's really kind of thinking about what your ultimate goals are with measurement and why you're collecting, who your audiences are. So grounding in that, and then really looking at your data collection approaches, from the methods to the tools, and not to be forgotten, your team capacity, right? You could have the best tools that exist, but if you don't have the ability to make them happen in a consistent way, we find this is a very common challenge. And then finally is transform phase. And honestly, this is a place where we often lose folks, right? Like folks they've got good data collection practices, they've got lots of data, but they're not turning it into something that's usable, that's really transforming their organization. And that's where we're going to focus deeper. But before we go there, I also just want to get a pulse from the group. When you look at this flow, there's seven steps or 7 elements in here. Which of these do you think you're strongest in? Get a flavor. Your top strength. You can pick 1 or 2. Just drop numbers in chat. Cool. Great. It's encouraging. A lot of on the align phase, generally speaking. Data collection. Okay. Activities and approach. 2.5. Great. Okay. A little bit of variation. I'm not seeing a lot coming in for transform yet, so that's resonating with me. Okay. If you were to, let me flip the question. If you were to say, right now for me as an organization, for me to move into a stronger data-driven practice, outcomes orientation, what do I need to be focused on? Maybe go ahead and pick one from the continuum here, 1 to 2, just to get a flavor. And Noah, yes, we will make sure you guys get all of the content, recording and deck after. Okay. Okay, all right. So lots of 6 and 7s, data use, leadership, and culture. Those go part and parcel to one another. That's refreshing to hear. We're going to step a little bit deeper now into like, what does that look like? How do we do that and do that well? So I want to start with decision making. So again, like we framed it, we have data use can come into for decisions or for sharing, and which will eventually lead to greater engagement and capacity and resources. But let's focus first on decision making, which kind of the bottom line of this is improving our impact, right? Improving our supports, our quality. All of this is important from the impact side of the equation. So there are a lot of I imagine for y'all, there's a lot of things every day that come in your head around what should we be doing about this? How might we be changing that, right? Especially right now, when you start to get kind of influences from the external spaces, right? That you may be in a space where you actually have less funding than you did a year ago or 2 years ago. So this is a very common pressure we're seeing with a lot of our partners right now, where they are in scenarios where they actually their budget has been cut maybe by 25-30%, right? So then the question is, what do we do about that? What is the implication on our programming? So that would be one example of a type of decision that you may be grappling with right now. We know others are. I'd love to hear from you guys. What's one program or funding decision you're sitting on right now that you actually could better push with data? Data would help you to make a better informed decision. And at this point, if anyone wants to unmute, welcoming that as well, or drop in chat, either way. Okay, thanks, Robin. So we've got labor allocation. So thinking about where to put your team resources, potentially on which projects or parts of projects. Okay, that's great. So you're more from the growth lens right now on new initiatives to pursue. Lauren, I see coming in with community hub locations and partner mix within. Okay, so some operational decisions that you're honing in on. Okay, Danny, yeah, deciding which programs should be offered yearly or limited to better allocate staff labor and company growth. All really important decisions as we think about sustaining organizations, think about growth, think about quality. I want to share a little bit more, just as an example, I think, Danny, that kind of sits with what you're pulling forward here. We were working with an organization that was, as I mentioned, their scenario was they were part of the federal cuts, right? And so their program budget was down by about 25%. And so their kind of key questions that they were grappling with is which program components are essential to getting the outcomes. They were a program that actually had quite a few tenets to what their programming offered. And the other question they were sitting with is what's the optimal frequency of participation to realize our outcomes. So what they had done, so I think one of the first important, just to kind of practically translate from these decisions you have to make to how do you use data threaded in, right, in an intentional way. So first step, they stepped back, came up with the key questions that they wanted to really answer. Then they had the opportunity for them, they were an organization that had a lot of data at hand, right? So it became a data mining exercise, just to step into their data and really review the data. They wanted to look at a couple of things of when we have, so the question of how does frequency influence outcomes? So they started to look at correlations between those that were coming 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week, and how did that impact their outcomes? How did that influence their outcomes? Similarly, so they wanted to look at, they had 5 kind of activity areas that they did in this program. They wanted to look at how well were each of those activity areas faring. So that became the data impetus to really sit down as a team. So they did analysis, they came together as a team, they looked at that data, and a couple things that surfaced for them that became very clear. They noticed that 3 times a week was kind of the sweet spot. Anyone coming 4, 5 times a week had no difference in their outcomes. Equally so, there was 2 of their activity areas that they were looking at that found that people just weren't coming. There was questions around quality of those. And so together with these kind of reflections, they were able to make some fine-tuned decisions around tightening up their program. They consolidated from 5 to 4 components of their program. They reset to a 3 times a week kind of expectation or offering, if you will. And what this did, staff, there was a huge sense of relief with staff. They were sitting in a place where they were just feeling like they had so much, they were doing too much with the resources they had. So there was a release of stress, which was really important. And also important for this group, it allowed them to maintain their whole staff without letting folks go because they were more fine-tuned and focused. And I think this is another thing that I don't think we do enough, but they shared the story with their funders and they said, like, here's what we were grappling with, and here's some learning we had. And I think that for them went quite far. And there was an opportunity even for getting some complimentary, small amount, but a complimentary funding amount from one of their funders in particular to support this. So just want to share, that's just one story. I know each of you have your own stories as well, and or will be kind of realizing your own stories as you continue in the decision-making space. Just a quick pause and check in. Is there anyone that has anything that they would want, like that maybe that there's a journey they've walked through recently in terms of decision-making that they would want to bring to surface? Feel free to unmute if you've got anything. No pressure if you don't. Okay. All right, I'll keep going, but if there's anything, don't hesitate to continue to share your experiences in chat. I think that's a great connection space for all of us. One thing that just shared the example. I think one of the things that we find that is actually simple but most essential, actually building the culture and the practice, is setting the internal, what I'll call infrastructure or structures to make sure data use is actually happening. Because everyone is you all are running very quickly. There's a lot going on, but if you have those kind of core anchors, it helps to actually make it happen. So here's a few I'll just highlight. Having organizations having monthly data dialogues. So that could be on a monthly basis, threading into already monthly team meetings or standing up new team meetings where you're actually reviewing your data dashboards. Just to kind of reflect on where we at, what are we noticing? Are there any adjustments we want to make? Strategic deep dives are an opportunity, just kind of like the example I just shared, where you might have like a key learning question. The question of like, how is frequency influencing our results, our outcomes, right? That you want to actually do some step back data analysis review on, and then bring a collective team together to move through a data use conversation. We use practices like emergent learning, where you're really kind of reflecting on questions around what the data is telling us, why is the data telling us this, and then questions like so what and now what, to really make sure you're moving from data to actual change. Other small things, if you're kind of sitting there like, yeah, that's good, and I just need some like really light touch wins right now. Things like data features and staff meetings, literally being able to just feature one point of data and having the team reflect on like, what does this mean? What are the implications of this? Or just even just observing, right? Starting to bring data into practice and culture. One other thing just to flag, this one's a little bit more, maybe not an everyday structure point, but something I think that's unique and different, especially seeing some YMCA folks on the call. This idea of like data murals in physical space. And we were working with one of the YMCA's, the question of like, what does joy, like how does the why bring you joy was the overarching question. And people in the foyer were able to add their reflections, their thinking, and then it was moving into their suggestions as well. So just like a small example of like real time moving from here's the data into some potential action to really engage community in that space. Okay. All right. as I'm going to transition us for a moment and just show you, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a platform to help to kind of streamline some of this practice. So I want to show you what that looks like. And as I'm transitioning, encourage y'all, if there's other examples on things you're doing to make sure you're bringing data to decision making in your organization, we'd love to hear that. So feel free again to drop those in chat or to unmute and share a bit of your story and experience. All right, well, let me go ahead and share with you. So just want to introduce you. This is our ResultsLab platform. And this is designed to really help, like I said, to streamline some of these practices in a way that can really just make it easier. And, you know, like my example I brought forward before of like that ability to really kind of crunch down the data and look at how frequency is influencing outcome, that can take a lot of time, right? And so this is a resource to support you in journeys like, or in steps like that in the journey. So what I'm going to show you today is, you can see on the left-hand side, there's several kind of pieces that align with our Align, Capture, Transform framework that we looked at in the beginning. So opportunity to build your impact and data plan, capture your data, make sense of your data, and share your data. So we're going to hover today. I'm just in terms of just giving you a flavor of what's in here on number 4 and 5. So if we come in and let's say we're sitting together as a team and we've got our data already synced up into this platform, and we want to sit and just, I want to kind of unpack my data a little bit. So I can step forward, and again, a good decision always starts with a learning question. So my question might be, how impactful, this is a mentoring program, how impactful is mentoring in impacting and to influence GPA or academic growth as measured by GPA? Okay, so always starting with the question, and then I have that ability to say, okay, now I want you to draw from my data. I want you to pull up what is the data telling me. So we'll give it a minute. It's doing its own reflection, and it's giving me kind of a top level summary saying, you know, a mentoring appears to be positively impacting GPA. Youth who had a mentor had higher GPA growth than youth who did not have a mentor. So it's giving me some kind of reflective data to better understand. So now I'm thinking, okay, so I've got, I have an understanding that my mentoring program is actually supporting, mentoring is actually supporting academic growth. I can then just take some further reflections on the why. So me and my team might be sitting together to like ask ourselves, well, why is mentoring increasing things? I can, you know, reflect together. Well, we might think that, you know, that close relationship with the adult is helping them to really better understand, like get greater self-efficacy, for example, right? Sometimes I might be in a space where I'm like, I need a little bit more support here, and I can explore ideas, bringing in research to give me ideas on where that connection gap may be. Ability to kind of, why might this be happening? And so what does this mean? So it's just kind of reflective prompts to help us think through like really unpacking our data in a way that's really meaningful. We can move through and decide on next steps. So I might say I want to increase mentor matches for all youth, right? That might be my action because of this. And this ability to say, you know, how do we go from, okay, we've got a whole list of ideas. Like often we do these sessions and people come up with like, here's 20 things I should be doing. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this is totally overwhelming, right? I don't have enough resources to make all these changes. This is a final simple step to say, how do I start thinking about a real prioritization. I might say like, this is something that might be high impact or harder to do. And it's just a way to start to prioritize your actions and then start to act on these actions. You can move these to your action board. So what I'm showing you here is just a way to, again, make it easier. Make sure you're moving from not only just kind of conversations around what's happening to true action. And what the tool and the platform is helping you do is to bring in a simple way, bring in your data, bring in research to have further reflections on that. Any questions there so far? Just on, or any reflections on, again, kind of the goal here was like a small deep dive on data decision making and how we can really bring it to life in a way that can work for your organizations. All right. Well, I'm going to keep us going then on that. Keep continuing to think about anything just that may be unique questions you may have about your context. We will have more of a Q&A in just a few moments. But before we go there, I do want to kind of take a little space with storytelling. I see a lot of you on the call. Oh, actually, let me check in here, Sammy. I see your comment coming in. So Sammy, I would recommend, so just so for everyone to see, the question is, if you have mostly output data and some outcome data, would you recommend mining what you have or building systems to gather more outcome and impact data? So I would start with your questions. What do you want to know? And so it might be, in this case, there's a particular decision, or it might be like, we just generally want to know if we're, what our outcomes of our program are, and or how we're having outcomes around, or having impact around certain, could be self-confidence or certain outcomes that are part of your model. So start with that, what you want to know. If you have like good enough data to start mining, I would start there. Because what happens is, if we can really start building our muscle from the beginning, right? Like having data, once you start to get in that data, often what will happen is you'll start to recognize, you know what, this is meeting most of my needs, but there's still some gaps. That becomes start your cycle to say, okay, I need to, how might I fill these data gaps? And then you kind of step back to really what that like drawing board is for a more refreshed data system and data practice. One of the things I also find, Sammy, is that, a lot of this is we have to convince our teams like that this is even a valuable place to be putting focus and energy right now, right? And one of the best ways to do that is for them to see the data come to life. So if you have some of those quicker wins that you could work with, I think that goes far, especially for the team members that are spending the time and space to actually collect the data, for them to see it coming back out. Yeah, you got it. All right. So storytelling. I see many of you on the call are sitting in seats that you are probably, this is probably a very natural part of your job, whether you're in fundraising, you're putting stories into share outs, in like verbally sharing them. You might be a CEO or a leader that you're constantly looking for, like, how do you bring the story to life, both within your team and outside of. So I think one of the most important pieces of storytelling is to know your audience, right? To start with, like, who is your audience that you're really trying to share your story? And what's unique to our conversation today is sharing your impact story. Many of us are great storytellers in different forms, but how do we really start to kind of bring the data and the impact into life? So questions, y'all, kind of to start us here is, I'm curious to hear who do you feel like is your most important audience to share your data with? If you don't mind just dropping your kind of maybe your top two in chat, just so we know kind of where folks are sitting in terms of who they're sharing story with. Okay, so Katie's got potential funders. Yep, Amy, same. Okay. Regulators, interesting, Robin. Okay. Okay. So we have a nice comment. Funders sound to be a common thread throughout just about everyone here, with some additions of community partners, community/partners, families. So some of the broader circles that wrap around our programs. Okay, got it. And let's just hone in on funders for a second. What are you all finding as the most compelling way? Like when I say way, what the kind of communication vehicle that you're using to really share your story with funders. So what you're seeing on the slide are a couple examples, from actual like short impact reports to deeper narratives to verbal conversations that you're bringing forward to presentation decks. There's a lot of different ways and venues to speak to the needs of your audience. And we'll look at a few of those shortly. But I'm curious, like, what's working for y'all as you think about funders as your primary audience? And again, if anyone wants to unmute, also love to hear voices. Yeah, so Holly's coming in. Naturally, grant proposals, reports, often we have requirements that we have to sit within when we're sharing back with funders, so that's understandable. Okay, Amy, that's cool. Okay, so you've got for corporate partners, the short impact reports are most helpful. Yep, digestible, and they can share them back with their teams. That's cool, Danny. So videos and written reports, data and storytelling, Bruce, yes. Danny, I'm curious if you don't mind either chatting a little bit more or unmuting. I'm curious to hear a little bit more of how your video, what your video sharing looks like, feels like.
Yeah, sure. So we do a sort of like annual report for one of our primary funders every year. And then a huge component of that is sort of turning that 4 to 5 page report that I do into a 2 minute video. And the goal is kind of for it to tell the same story as that report does. And then a huge part of like our capacity building is we do like a pitch competition. And so sort of storytelling people's general impact in like a very short 1 minute video is kind of also what we do for outcomes. So there's a lot of just kind of like video storytelling that's incorporating our data and kind of our participant experience. But yeah, when it comes to reporting, we do use like 2 to 3 minute videos to do like annual and sort of impact reports.
Awesome. I love to hear that. I think that the thing that we're noticing is there's a more, so when we think about more institutional funders, foundations, government even, I'd say more foundations, there's a shift in expectations and desires around how data flows in, right? And from a reporting lens, we're finding a more openness to some of these creative ways, some of these more humanistic ways to be sharing stories versus the very traditional long and in-depth report, which is encouraging. And I appreciate, like Amy, your note on corporate partners, like thinking be outside the institutional funders. I think there's always been that desire of like, how do we make this story really come to life in a very succinct and compelling way? Definitely opportunity there to kind of continue to think about bringing it forward. So I want to share with you all just a few examples of ways to bring the data to life that we've been using. But one of the things that, before I do that, I think one of the things that I think, like whatever the venue or the vehicle may be, across all of these examples, I think there's a couple things just to always like anchor in, especially as we're trying to think about how do we go from just storytelling that may be based on anecdotes or based on outputs to true outcomes. And this is just a kind of a base frame to be considered. Again, very simple in nature, but I think done well can be very compelling. So making sure you're very clearly articulating your who or your what, kind of the mechanism of change, then moving into what changed. So this is your space for outcomes, right? To make sure that's very clearly coming to life, and then why. And I think this is just a kind of a flip on the script as we think about, instead of just moving of like, we did these many outputs, this many outcomes, or this type of outcomes to get to this. It's really kind of trying to be able to balance between changes happen because we did these activities that had, this level of engagement and participation at this quality, right? You're really able to tie those two together for a braided story. And then like that last piece that's so critical of like, why does this even matter? Being able to click this in with and this could come in different forms. It could come in a narrative form of where it's like, yeah, this is contributing to our impact, right? Or it could come like as a tie to actual research that sits in the broader field that we know that, when students graduate high school, they're, much more likely to X, Y, and Z, right? From a thriving perspective. Or it also could be in the space of voice. And I think this is kind of probably my most favorite one is like, how does this matter to the individuals that are experiencing the change and having their voice come into life? And this is, Danny, like your example of the videos, this is likely where, some of that can really be nourished. So base frame, 4 areas, and then kind of threading across all of these is the question of how do you know? So bringing data in to support each of these elements in the right kind of intensity and matter. Awesome. I'm just checking back in over chat. So let me just show you a few examples, and then I again would just love to hear how these might be resonating with you, and if there's others that you wanna share further on. I'm gonna stop sharing just for now and bring us back into our platform. All right, so we've got, move into step 5, sharing data. So we have, and this is something we are still in the early development days of this overall platform. So we're continuing to add different features and formats as we think about how to be sharing our data. You can see right now there's 5 kind of core areas, and I'll show you a few of these to bring them to life. I want to first start with outcomes at a glance. This is one, so we have been working with a wide variety of YMCAs, and for some of our YMCA leaders, they were kind of really reflecting on like, what do they need at a leadership level and a board level to just kind of very succinctly show what the change is. So let me just give you a flavor of what this looks like. And also for those of you that are as part of the WISE on the call, and many other programs, we know there's a lot of different layers of an organization and like how to roll that up in a like easy to digest way. So in their case, or in this example's case, we've had 3 different programmatic areas from teens to mental health to seniors. And then also looking at like what are the kind of roll up themes across our outcomes. And for them, it's achievement, relationship, and belonging. Those become the kind of 3 core threads that are important to really, I think, for a lot of the YMCAs now in the network. And so just making an ability to kind of tap into a very interactive platform or a visual, if you will. So ability to say, hey, I just want to click in on mental health, right? And they'll filter down what are the outcomes for mental health. Or I want to click on achievement, and you'll see, coming to life specific how achievement looks different, whether you're a teen in mental health programs or in seniors. The kicker to this like interactive report is, these are just statements. These are statements of change, but they are missing the like, what is the data that sits behind it? So it does have a feature here. You can flip it, and it shows the evidence, right? And it shows, where that evidence is coming from, and really trying to bring to life that not only the what change is happening, but the how we know change is happening. So that's, and if any of you, we're happy to share this so you can have a little bit more of a dive on this one. But this was one simple, like this is a great landing point for, again, folks that sit at that board level or that like senior executive leadership level that just don't have the space to get too deep, but they really just want to know what is changing. This could also be something great to share with partners as well. A couple other examples just to kind of whet our appetite here. Data snapshot. This is an example of, so for those of you who have flagged internal, staff being a true audience of sharing your story and using data. This is an internal, basically, it's a dashboard, but I'd call it more of like a data playground where you can come in and see kind of headlines. So you can collapse all these. These are the questions that we're essentially answering. Who are we creating change with? You can see the key visuals coming to life. And what's great about this is this ability just to very easily maneuver in there, change how you want to visualize in forms and fashions that are going to best suit your needs, right? And so this is where like the staff playground, that ability to make this very live and interactive is important. So you can see the kind of frames, what are we doing? Seeing that come to life. What may be changing? Seeing those come to life. And then I think this one's kind of interesting. So this question of what are we hearing, how we can really be bringing voice in. And so in this case, we have a whole slew of stories that we've been piping in to better understand change. And it's important that, I think many of you probably like sit with this, is like, we don't want to just be putting that cherry, like that one beautiful story out there always, right? It's like, how do you move from anecdotes to something more systematic? So in this case, you can actually synthesize for themes, and it'll pull those out as we're thinking about understanding voice and understanding some of the qualitative data in our pictures, and it gives share some representative quotes. So, as you can see, this is very much a, it's meant for internal engagement. You can click on, I want to understand my descriptive stats, trends over time. It allows you to continue to go deeper with your data. So great for an internal staff to be able to work through different needs and desires. You can see that coming up. We recognize this wouldn't be the optimal fit for external audiences. So let me just show you one more example of what an external impact report might look like. So you can see just like that, like simple one pager, much more visual. You can see your impact journey coming to life. This is kind of your theory of change, your impact strategy. Summary on who you serve, what we did, what changed, and those stories, right? But this ability to really customize these based on your audience, think about what you want to include, making this like more extended, accordion if there's more detail or depth on learning in different areas. But this is just a really simple way to make sure you're, again, tracking back to your kind of core areas of interest and focus. All right. So as you guys saw some of that come to life, just want to check back in with you all with kind of any questions or reactions on that, and or anything else that from a storytelling lens that you have found to be especially provocative or compelling to audience in which you're sharing that I haven't mentioned. Social media, question mark? Yes, yes. How many of you are using social media as an outlet to kind of get, like, it's almost story bites, right? Out to your audiences. Seeing some head nods. Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's a very, like, thinking about the broader kind of broader community, broader like suite of partners. It's a great way to be able to, like, in a bite-sized format, take everything I was just kind of pulling out and really simplifying it for share. And you could be taking some of those actual just story bites and sharing those directly as well. Right. Well, Jackie, I'd love to turn it over to you. We'd like to spend the last few minutes together, moving into some Q&A, and then we'll be wrapping further with resources and support to move forward.
Awesome. Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to come off camera, off mute. I thought we could start with, if we as you're thinking about walking this journey, what's one decision that you've been making on instinct that could come from real data? So feel free to come off mute. That's one question that we get a lot with our teams. And as you think about how to take action in what we're learning today, is there something that you've been making decisions on instinct? Any thoughts there?
A thought that comes up for me is I think that the way that we gather data around staffing and like employee strengths and challenges, I think sometimes in staffing and changes in, department or organizational roles, it's different than student outcomes or things like that we're collecting at our organization. But I think, I think we could develop ways to use data more surrounding like human resources decision making. It's a different, we have data and it's different types of data, but I don't know that I think that there's new ways that we could learn from that type of data or use it differently.
Yeah, Kenzie, any thoughts on that as it relates to other ways outside of just programmatic?
Yeah, I mean that fits pretty squarely as we think about some of those core outputs that you might be collecting, right? And some of your operational data that you might have access to. I mean, even things like case management ratios, right? Or staffing rate, depending on the type of program you have, and being able to take a pulse on that. And I think that the thing that I would encourage, like, and how does that connect to some of your other elements on that continuum, right? Sometimes that just is a standalone saying like, our ratios are 6 out of 12 and they were supposed to be 8 out of 12, right? That's I think that's a start, like to being able to have like reflection to target and where we're intending to be, but kind of that bigger so what, like what are the implications on, it could, and in this case it could be more on like staff retention, staff morale, or program quality, like that ability to tie it to the so what of that becomes really important. I think that's like I've seen in practice that's where you get some of the game changing like ahas that come out.
Awesome. Any other thoughts around instinct or we talked a little bit about who needs to hear your impact story. But if anybody wants to share any experience there about maybe aha moments on certain audiences that you've shared stories with and things that have come from those conversations, talk about that.
So I have one thing that's just on my mind right now related to this, and that's we work in several fields where there are really big ongoing systemic issues like homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can show our program has impact on homelessness for the participants. But trying to tell that story that it's impactful when you're looking at a broader narrative that shows homelessness going up and up and up in your region is a real challenge. And so I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting and somewhat common reality, right? When your story doesn't necessarily complement the broader community trends that you're seeing. So I think in some ways it almost becomes an even more compelling story, right? To say like, here's what we're seeing transitioning with this geography or this entity of individuals that we're working with. We still see that there's a gap, right, in terms of the broader community. So it's almost like an opportunity to say like, how can we continue to like scale this, or how we can continue to amplify this concentration of change to the broader. And it's looking at like what are some of the differences of like what's happening within your community versus the broader context, and it's also getting to that why question, like why is change happening within your context and why is it not happening in the broader context, right? And so it leads to a call to action in some regards very naturally.
Yeah, I think what we get sometimes is feelings from funders, especially government agencies, maybe of like, well, we keep putting money towards you, and yet our homelessness rate keeps going up. And so, that occasionally, you get the feeling that behind the teeth, somebody's calling you a liar, that you're actually
Yes.
having an impact because there are still homeless people who are living in homelessness. So yeah, but I do think that that's probably a gap in the ability to show the difference between what's happening with the larger population, what's happening with the people we're actually working with.
One of our partners we were talking to most recently is really trying to get to the root causes too. So thinking about, Kenzie, I don't know if you want to talk anything about that one particular project around food insecurity and figuring out really like what is the root cause that's causing folks to be standing in line, and how do you start to address those? Like not necessarily this organization wants to address it, but find the right partners to be able to address those root causes so that they can collectively start to reduce the barriers there. Kenzie, I don't know if you want to say anything more, but
I think that's well said. Yeah. And honestly, like I think that's kind of the differential of outcomes versus the actual impact, that like much longer term sustained impact. We know there's a lot of other influencers that may impact or influence your ability to get to true impact and measure that. And so I think what Jackie's bringing up is like, how do you tell that story of like, what are those influencers that you may or may not be able to attract on?
Great. Well, I know we're coming up on time. I will be sending out the recording, all of the slides, any tools that have been shared here today, and some other resources. So be on the lookout for that. We are going to be hosting monthly coffee collectives just to continue conversation, really help you all connect and collaborate in big ways. A lot of what we do every day is really, in the weeds. Everyone's very busy. So how do you take space to just lift out and have some big conversations? So we're here to help support any way we can. And we get really excited about data and these conversations and would love to bring you along that journey and bring your teams along that journey and really think about the purpose of data in the social sector. So great to see you all today. Thanks for joining us. And we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Kenzie, Jackson. Good to see you.
You
Great
too,
to
Ruth.
see you. All right, good to see you. Bye.